After what feels like an age, welcome back to another thematic list build. I felt with the Nids taking the spotlight for the launch of 10th, it was only suitable to serve them up the first thematic list build of 10th edition. And by popular request, we're focusing on the insidious Hive fleet which loves to tunnel. It's a thematic list build for Hive fleet Jormungandr. Since I'm finally returning to this series for 10th edition, I felt I'd try to improve some elements of the format structure, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Now typically, this was the part of the video where I would take a look at the subfaction rules, and provide a brief rules critique on the mechanical highs and lows GW has provided to the faction of focus. But since GW has decided to not give subfactions rules in 10th, it seems they've found a way to dodge my critiques. So I guess this section will now become the part where I share the rationale on which detachment rule set I feel is best for the faction, or at the very least, best for what I have in mind for a particular list build. The new 10th edition Tyranids Codex provides a set of detachment rules which I feel are fairly good, and I'm happy to point out there isn't a dwarfing escalation of power gained from the Codex's release, as we have had with the publications of 8th and 9th edition. And when we look at our Legacy or Prime Hive fleets, there are strong associations for most of them, where we can see certain detachments boast certain mechanics or incentivize certain playstyles, ideal for flexing the thematic aspects of particular Hive fleets. The one exception is Jormungandr. Regrettably, the badass tunneling Hive fleet doesn't have a standout detachment, which is a big letdown for me. Sure, you can use any detachment you want, but there isn't an option here that flexes Jormungandr's quintessential quality to its fullest. That being their insidious unorthodox tactics, most notably their use of tunnels. But how does Jormungandr use those tunnels? Well, to get a better idea, we can look back at their 9th edition rule set. We can see their subfaction rule, Tunnel Networks, provided the benefits of cover versus ranged attacks when far away. Not the most elegant way to abstract tunneling mechanics, but it's adequate enough. They also had an insidious warlord trait based on denying environmental safety nets, a psychic ability to boost killing power in melee, a relic which preys on fear, and a stratagem which opened up deep strike exceptions. All said, the 10th edition detachment options doesn't really offer up anything substantively equivalent. Here's what I would have loved to see. Longtime viewers may recall an old video of mine on fixing the Nid Hive fleets. This is an echo of that. Give us a Tunnel Networks detachment with the following rule. Tunnel Networks. Units set up in strategic reserves can be set up as if it were disembarking from a tunneler keyword unit, but only if that tunneler unit's OC characteristic is equal to or larger than any of the models being set up by this ability. Units set up in this way must remain outside of 9 inches from enemy models, and naturally, tunneling units would include Raveners, Trigons, Molochs, and Rippers. And, at the end of the enemy turn, any unit not in engagement range can be removed from the battlefield as if it were embarking into a tunneler keyword unit, and be placed into strategic reserves. Essentially, represent tunnel networks in a manner that provides slippery deceptive utility, as that is far and away thematically stronger than using tunnel networks to provide a cover save. Plus, it checks the boxes for providing a unique playstyle, and encouraging the use of units which aren't flexed in the current detachment set. But I digress. But of course, we must keep this list grounded in one of the detachments the current codex offers. And so the question becomes, which detachment is best for Jormungandr? And honestly, I don't have a definitive answer. While Synaptic Nexus does provide a few tools to build around leadership tests, and the Vanguard Onslaught detachment does contain unorthodox mobility tools, I feel the list I have in mind for Jormungandr won't contain enough Synapse or Vanguard keyword units to effectively leverage the tools of Synaptic Nexus or Vanguard Onslaught. Furthermore, the new codex has lost some of the unit options which I really would have preferred to make use of as well. And so for the list I have in mind, we're going with the debut launch detachment, the Tyranid Invasion Swarm. I know it's not the new hotness, but hear me out. Its detachment rule, while not providing the utility I would prefer, Hyper-adaptations does give you the ability to capitalize on your opponent's strengths, potentially turning them to your favor. Combined with the alien cunning enhancement, I think it begins to feel a little bit sinister, as it gives you another mechanic which provides you a tactical affordance after players would normally be locked in. Plus, stratagems like rapid regeneration and endless swarm does add a sense of dread. And the overrun stratagem does provide a potent movement-oriented exception. When it comes to the thematic objectives of the list, they are burrowing bioforms. Naturally, for Jormungandr, I want to create a list which features loads of terrifying tunneling bioforms. And insidious tactics, to create a list which is able to leverage some cagey movement-related tools, as from a player v player perspective, it's those kinds of exceptions which cause the most concern. Now, let's head over to the list breakdown. Let's start with the Warlord. Now, if this were an 8th or 9th edition thematic list build, I would be taking a Trigon Prime as our Warlord. A serpentine synapse-capable monster is, for me, the ideal choice for a Jormungandr list. But Trigon Primes were axed from the 10th edition rules. Odd choice when you consider that the Leman Russ battle tank has 7 datasheets for all its variants, but I suppose
modern problems require modern solutions.
In any case, here is my creative solution. Essentially, put a Trigon Prime on the table, and we're going to represent it using a Tervagon with adaptive biology. The Tervagon has the synapse we want, and the right base size, and a beefy defensive stat line that benefits well from the Invasion Fleet's adaptive biology enhancement. It does lack the offensive punch of a Trigon Prime, but there's not much we can do about that. Anyways, seeing as this is technically a Tervagon, the list includes 20 Termagants. And while a Trigon Prime has no business spawning Termagants, for the theme of our list, I think Termagants spilling out of the Trigon Prime's burrowing point is quite thematic. You can imagine a Jormungandr assault would have Tervagons nested in the tunnel networks, sending reinforcements where they're needed. Which brings us to the burrowing core of this list. Starting with our Ravener Broods, 2 units of 3 and 1 unit of 6. Raveners are swift with 10 inches of movement, and have a dreadful number of attacks. Each model has 7 twin-linked attacks in melee, providing them with the quantity to take advantage of the hyper-adaptation you've teched into more reliably. But perhaps more importantly, Raveners bring some real Jormungandr flavor. They have built-in deep strike, and their unique ability, Death from Below, allows you to return them back to reserves at the end of the enemy turn. It makes them very slippery, and very useful with regards to tactical secondary missions. Speaking of which, the list includes 3 units of single model Rippers. These small burrowing bugs are here for secondary missions, like engage on all fronts, investigate signals, and behind enemy lines. And if your opponent doesn't deal with them, they can potentially reduce enemy OC should they reach engagement range. And serving to bring some real terror from below are 3 Molochs and 3 Trigons. These 6 monsters have an identical stat line of movement 10, with 14 wounds behind a toughness of 10 and a 3-up save. Where Trigons and Molochs begin to differ is in their weapons. Offensively, Trigons skew more for anti-elite over the Molochs' high volume of anti-infantry attacks, but their abilities set them even further apart. The Trigon's subterranean tunnels allows it to be set up from reserves anywhere so long as it's more than 3 inches from enemy models, but if it does so, it cannot charge. While the Moloch's Terror from the Deep ability enables it to deal D3 mortal wounds to every enemy unit within 12 inches when it arrives from Deep Strike, providing you roll a 2+. But if you roll a 5+, that enemy unit suffers a flat 3 mortal wounds and must take a Battle Shock test, which feels to me like peak Jormungandr. So it follows you'll want to deploy the Molochs into reserves to capitalize on their mortal wound potential. Though for the Trigon's ability, you likely won't want to Deep Strike all of them, but knowing you can Deep Strike within 3 inches will certainly keep your opponent's backline honest. The next component of the list is quite honestly the least thematic. A Winged Warrior Prime leading a unit of 3 ranged Tyranid warriors. The unit has 2 purposes. The first is to serve as a vehicle for the Alien Cunning enhancement, granting a potent redeployment tool, which you can use to course correct, or ideally, bait and switch your opponent during the deployment game. And secondly, to serve as a backfield objective holder while the tunneling bioforms take the spotlight. And the last of our burrowing bioforms are 2 parasites of Mortrex. Now you might be thinking, but wait, parasites of Mortrex don't burrow. Well, my dear viewer, if you look closer, you'll notice these 2 parasites look uncannily similar to Red Terrors. It's another thematic counts as. For starters, the base size is right. The parasite of Mortrex's deep strike ability works well enough to represent the Red Terror arriving from below. And the parasite has that 1 bonus attack, which does a decent job representing the Red Terror's Swallow Whole ability. And to top it off, the parasite can proc the creation of more Ripper Swarms, which we can narratively spin as reinforcements. And the parasite of Mortrex's It Itches ability causes battle shock tests in the fight phase, which I think feels quite suitable for the aptly named Red Terror. And that's the list. While Jormungandr is probably the worst off with regards to detachment flavor and unit options to flex their themes in the new codex, I think the thematic counts as of the Tervagon and 2 parasites goes a long way to shore up those lacks. Looking at the numbers, the list boasts 188 wounds across 18 units and 48 models. And looking at these nifty charts, we can see the majority of those wounds are at a fairly high toughness, with more than 50% above toughness 9, and more than 80% above toughness 4. Charts are fun, right? Let me know if you think cool charts like these should be a regular part of the Thematic List Build series going forward. That's a wrap on this Jormungandr Thematic List Build, the first one of 10th edition. If you like these videos and want to support what I do, consider becoming a patron or channel member. It's thanks to them I'm able to produce videos like this, which is why they have a place on the Roll of Honor. Much thanks to Julius Maximus, as well as my other generous patrons and channel members. There are certainly more ways to go about creating thematic lists, and so I invite you to share yours in the comments. And comment below with what factions you would like to see for future thematic list builds. Anyways, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing, so press the buttons you want to press, and I'll catch you in the next one.